Good afternoon. Welcome to Between Two Teachers. I'm Madeline Cronenberg.
And I'm Consuelo Lara.
And we're here yet again to talk about issues around education in West Contra Costa Unified. I wanted to start by following up on Consuelo's message to the children of West Contra Costa in our last episode, where she did mention a young man who's the student board member in LAUSD. And his name is Justin Okeke. And he...
Tyler,
I'm sorry. Thank you. Tyler Okeke. And he spoke incredibly eloquently about the issues regarding the moratorium that was passed in LA following the strike. And the most important thing he said was that the charter industry had galvanized, to use his words, galvanized families with lies and exaggerations. And that's exactly what happened in LA. That's what's happening throughout the state and certainly here in our district. And I just want to call him out. I will put the link to his comments and the video on the description of this episode, so that if you haven't had a chance to hear him in person, you'll be able to hear him there. We want to now continue the conversation around the moratorium before we move on to anything else. So Consuelo is going to give us some comments on the moratorium resolution.
We also talked about having some announcements. Should we say those to the end? We'll do those towards the end, because things are heating up. Things are really heating up here politically, and we feel like, we're front and center of a very serious movement here, a social justice movement, focusing on public education. And this is it's really getting a lot of attention and a lot of focus, and there's a lot of myths out there, and those are the things we're trying to clear up here, because we're right in the middle of all of this. One of the things that concerns me are the lies that are being perpetuated out to our community about. I'm sure they're going to say, oh, they're going to try to close your school. They don't want you to have expand a school. They are going to close them, and all of this. But those are not true. And what we're trying to do is look at the total impact that these schools have, the charter industry has on our schools. And so there's things you have to read the moratorium, the resolution. Read the resolution itself, point by point. If you have questions, you can call and ask or email, any of the board members or me, and we can talk about it, and we can answer your questions about it. But the main points are, we're talking about state laws that are not fair right now, and we want those changed. Okay, there's so many of them. I don't know where to start. So many things, like, well, for instance, I had a principal said to me, I'm a principal now, and I had to teach a certain number of years, I think 5 years. I had to go to college. I had to get my credential, and then I had to apply to be a principal in this district. And she said, but any Joe Schmo can open a charter school. And I thought, oh yeah, that's true. That's pretty unfair. That's not fair. How is that? Okay, so that's just one of the many unfair laws we're trying to we're trying to cover in this resolution. The other is called the Brown Act, and that means that public meetings have to be public and accessible to parents, to community members, and they're not. So we want to make sure that they follow the law when it comes to that. And the Attorney General agrees with that idea. And then the whole area of conflict of interest, that's where the money goes, and how people are using investments in real estate to make money off of charter schools. So And then just having an ongoing report, an ongoing analysis of what is the impact of these charters on the larger district and everybody else who's left in the schools and the individuals. So, and that one about the conflict of interest, that's called the California Political Reform Act. So, and then things like we need to have people on their boards from our district so that there's that communication, that transparency.
Community members.
And community members on their boards as well. So all we're asking here is what every other public school does in terms of accountability, transparency, participation, accessibility. These are all things that are fair. That's what we want. We want these laws to be fair. We want the charter schools to be fair. Nowhere in here will you find the word close a school. That's nowhere here. So anybody that's going to come on the 27th and hold a sign, don't close our school, nobody's saying that. So that's kind of my 2 cents, and that's how I feel about it. So what are your thoughts?
The other thing I do want to mention is that when we had the conversation, when the conversation was held about the resolution, not all board members were in agreement. And sadly, not all board members agreed that our schools are a place where we can proudly send our children. Our children are our greatest treasures, and our schools are populated by the children of West Contra Costa, and I don't believe there's any school, a school that is given the label of failing and underperforming is a school that needs more support. But it doesn't mean it's a school that you shouldn't, that the children are there, that their parents should try to be getting out. That is not what it means. It means that those families need more support, and we're looking for ways to give them more support. I don't believe it's fair to say to those families or to any family that you shouldn't send your child to this school because this is a failing school. What that simply means is this is a school where folks are struggling, and if anything, they need your support. They don't need you to run away from them if they're the school down the block. And I find it heartbreaking that people who have responsibility for these schools are essentially themselves steering people away from our schools. And I certainly heard that the other day.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it is incredible to have that come from a board member. It's very sad, because our goal needs to be to improve our schools.
Every school
For every child, and address those issues. So, and we know we can do it. We've done it before, and we need to roll up our sleeves and get to work, and not just sit and criticize, and then suggest to parents they abandon their local school. So, yeah, that's the issue that we're up against, and just again, that this resolution doesn't have anything to do with closing schools. It's about no more new schools. Like, we were able to keep Rocket Ship out. KIP, we don't want them to come to our district. We have plenty of charter schools where we are, and so this is about expansion of new ones.
This is about preventing a drain on our resources. My children were in the school district when the teachers and support staff received a 9% raise, which those families, those teachers, had to give back. We just gave a big raise to our teachers in order for there to be retention. Right? And we've been incredibly successful. That's part of the conversation at Lincoln. What would happen if they have to give that back? What would happen with retention? What would happen with the progress and the investment we've made in them as teaching professionals? It would be gone. And I've seen it happen. I remember when that happened And I don't want to see that happen to the children here today. That's why we have to have the moratorium. We have to have Governor Newsom's panel, and they need to come to the conclusion that in districts that are impacted like ours, where over 10%, 15, 20, 30%, depending on which district you're in, of your children have abandoned your system, and essentially you've now lost that ADA. You're unable to offer what your children deserve. You're not able to offer the nurses, you're unable to offer the librarians, you're unable to offer the support to your teachers and to our families. That's the crisis. That's why this is such an important resolution. It's why we have to bring it so that it goes statewide.
Absolutely. And I would add to that, I really, when people say, well, why do we have to cut, why do we have to cut, for instance, grad tutors? Why are we making all of these cuts? And for people actually in the same breath say, well, we gave raises. And to connect those two together is unfair. It is very unfair, and they need to stop doing that. Connect those cuts to the charters. That's where you need to make the connection. That is the reason we don't have the money for the grad tutors. That's why.
That's right.
Because we should be able to pay teachers a living wage and have the academic support and have all of the resources that we need for our support staff. We should be able to have that. And the reason we don't have that is not so this is like infighting. Let's have them fight over the crumbs inside. What is that? Divide and conquer. Mm-hmm. It is the charter industry that is causing this drain on our resources and causing this problem. So we have to be clear about that. And I just, it came up the other day or the other night at the LCAP, where they just kind of seem to put that in the same paragraph. And it's
not the reason.
It's not
the reason, right? And to switch over to the LCAP for a minute, I do want to say one thing. And I have watched the last two LCAP meetings online, and I am so very happy that they're available on Facebook, because it allows all of us who aren't able to attend to be able to watch. But what I hope happens in the future, and I'm speaking now to also to staff who've put these meetings together, from being a teacher, from being an adult school teacher who sort of knows how adults need to be have information presented to them. I think the key information that hasn't been focused on is we have a page that shows each of our schools and how much money each school gets in their LCAP as site funds. It also shows which schools have grad tutors, which schools are community schools, and which schools, what the allocation is for vice principals and assistant principals. That piece of paper, that sheet, needs to be focused on so folks understand what you're actually talking about as far as the dollars go, and what the services are that have been allocated. And I think rather than starting with the 5 areas that the district is looking at as their goals, start out with how much money we're talking about in each school, and you'll have a deeper understanding of, first of all, how small the amount is, and that, if anything, that's one of the reasons that we need to grow how much money schools in California receive. So that's the first thing. And how in some schools it's maybe under $20,000. Well, that's what you're talking about. That's because those schools have small, unduplicated numbers. So those schools may have other assets. They're all different, but you need to really look at that sheet. That it's an information sheet. It's part of the LCAP. You can find it, but do look at that to really understand the real focus of what we're talking about. I think sometimes people get lost in the weeds and spend a lot of time talking about things that in the end they're going to get frustrated. I've seen this over the years that I've been involved, that ultimately people come out feeling very frustrated because they'll say, well, why didn't you tell me that first? Then I would have understood the context of what of the discussion, and so we don't always do a good job of laying out the context, and it's a financial context that you have to lay out first before you get into the philosophical context. So that's just my little 2 cents on LCAP.
Yeah, and I was at that meeting, and you're right. I believe they handed out that sheet that you're talking about,
But they didn't
but
talk
they
about
didn't
it.
talk about it at all.
So
And
nobody looked at it.
and they talk in such broad general terms that then we just complain in broad general terms. And you're right. There's no specifics about the money. You know, somebody came up, the PTA, Bayside PTA, Leslie.
Yeah, Leslie Reckler.
She came up and had a great question. She asked people if they would be if they had a meeting to about where the money comes from or
That's what she said.
how the
How schools are funded.
how many people would be interested in that? There was a lot of people that raised their hand. Yeah, because they don't know. So I thought that was a great idea.
It is a great idea. And
So-
that would be a very good opportunity for people to understand that there's funding that comes from the state, there's funding that comes from other sources, from the federal sources, and there's our local parcel taxes, so that there's a number of different places funding come from.
Yeah.
And at the same time, just to do a little kickback to the other conversation, we could also say, where does funding come for the charter schools, who have a deeper connection to philanthropy?
That would only be fair to also know where their money comes
Yes,
from.
yes.
Penny,
So,
I mean, we can tell you to the penny where our money comes from and how it's spent.
Mhm.
Charters, you need to do that as well. That's only fair.
Right.
That's all we want. We want it with fair, truly. Okay.
I just want to do one more thing, and that is give a shout out to the James Morehouse Project and El Cerrito High, and thank them for their years of service. They had a wonderful celebration last week, and I just wanted to make sure that we recognize them here.
Yes, and that's it for
That's
this,
it for this week.
time. Okay.